white, per Arameri decree. Above the city, smaller, but brighter, the pearl of its tiers occasionally obscured by scuds of cloud, was the palace, also called sky, and perhaps more deserving of the name. I knew the column was there, the impossibly thin column that supported such a massive structure, but from that distance I couldn't see it. Palace floated above the city, linked in spirit, both so unearthly in their beauty that I held my breath at the sight. The altar skirt rose is priceless because of the difficulty of producing it. The most famous lines are heavily inbred. It originated as a deformity that some savvy breeder deemed useful. The primary flower's scent, sweet to us, is apparently repugnant to insects. These roses must be pollinated by hand. The secondary flower saps nutrients crucial for the plant's fertility. Seeds are rare, and for every one that grows into a perfect altar skirt, 10 others become plants that must be destroyed for their hideousness. At the gates of Sky, the palace, I was turned away, though not for the reasons I had expected. My grandfather was not present, it seemed. He had left instructions in the event of my arrival. Sky is the Arameri's home. Business is never done there. This is because, officially, they do not rule the world. The nobles' consortium does, with the benevolent assistance of the Order of Tempus. The consortium meets in the salon, a huge stately building, white-walled, of course, that sits among a cluster of official buildings at the foot of the palace. It is very impressive, and would be more so if it did not sit squarely in Sky's elegant shadow. I went inside and announced myself to the consortium staff, whereupon they all looked very surprised, though politely so. One of them, a very junior aide, I gathered, was dispatched to escort me to the central chamber, where the day's session was well under way. As a lesser noble, I had always been welcome to attend a consortium gathering, but there had never seemed any point. Besides the expense and months of travel time required to attend, Darr was simply too small, poor, and ill-favored to have any clout, even without my mother's abdication adding to our collective stain. Most of High North is regarded as a backwater, and only the largest nations there have enough prestige or money to make their voices heard among our noble peers. So I was not surprised to find that the seat reserved for me on the consortium floor, in a shadowed area behind a pillar, was currently occupied by an excess delegate from one of the Senem continent nations. It would be terribly rude, the aide stammered anxiously, to dislodge this man, who was elderly and had bad knees. Perhaps I would not mind standing? Since I had just spent many long hours cramped in a carriage, I was happy to agree. So the aide positioned me at the side of the consortium floor, where I actually had a good view of the goings-on. The consortium chamber was magnificently apportioned, with white marble and rich dark wood that had probably come from Darr's forests in better days. The nobles, 300 or so in total, sat in comfortable chairs on the chamber's floor or along elevated tiers above. Aides, pages, and scribes occupied the periphery with me, ready to fetch documents or run errands as needed. At the head of the chamber, the consortium overseer stood atop an elaborate podium, pointing to members as they indicated a desire to speak. Apparently, there was a dispute over water rights in a desert somewhere. 5 countries were involved. None of the conversation's participants spoke out of turn. No tempers were lost. There were no snide comments or veiled insults. It was all very orderly and polite, despite the size of the gathering and the fact that most of those present were accustomed to speaking however they pleased among their own people. One reason for this extraordinary good behavior stood on a plinth behind the overseer's podium. A life-size statue of the Sky Father in one of his most famous poses, the appeal to mortal reason. Hard to speak out of turn under that stern gaze. But more repressive, I suspected, was the stern gaze of the man who sat behind the overseer in an elevated box. I could not see him well from where I stood, but he was elderly, richly dressed, and flanked by a younger blond man and a dark-haired woman, as well as a handful of retainers. It did not take much to guess this man's identity, though he wore no crown, had no visible guards, and neither he nor anyone in his entourage spoke throughout the meeting. "Hello, grandfather," I murmured to myself, and smiled at him across the chamber, though I knew he could not see me.